man inside Gwinnett County Jail was pacing, agitated, exposing himself to a cellmate, and then starting fights with every person they put him near. People who knew him, people who had sat across studio consoles from him, watched him build records from nothing, said they didn't recognize the person in that footage. One person who claimed to have spoken to the jail directly described him putting his genitals on another inmate's head. The word that kept coming back from those closest to him was the same one every time: he lost it. The man behind those bars had once been called the architect of an entire sound. He was the producer who handed Chicago its first truly original musical identity since Kanye West. His beats launched careers, reshaped the rap industry, and put a city on the map. His name is Tyree Lamar Pittman, aka Young Chop. By the time those jail reports started circulating, the distance between who he had been and who he appeared to be was so enormous it felt impossible to reconcile. This is the story of how that distance was built. One loss, one decision, 1 year at a time. The Southside architect Tyree Pittman was born on November 14, 1993, on the south side of Chicago, a part of the city that has always operated on its own frequency, where the rules of survival get learned early and the music that comes out of it tends to carry the weight of everything that shaped it. Chicago in the late 90s and early 2000s had artists who broke through nationally, but the city didn't have a sound of its own the way the South did with Gucci Mane, or the way the coast had been dictating rap's direction for decades. What Chicago had was energy without a container, raw, restless, and looking for a form. Pittman's household wasn't small. His mother had adopted 5 children from her brother, which meant the house was full, loud, and crowded with competing demands on everything: space, attention, time. The one thing nobody competed with Pittman for was the family computer. He claimed it almost entirely, and what he was doing on it from around the age of 12 was making beats. His cousin had shown him FL Studio, the beat-making software, and something clicked immediately, the way it clicks for people who have found the thing they were supposed to be doing all along. He wasn't particularly formal about it. He learned through YouTube tutorials, through trial and error, through listening obsessively to the producers whose work he admired: Pharrell, Timbaland, Drummer Boy, Zaytoven. He studied the structures underneath Gucci Mane's mixtape records: the bass weight, the tempo, the way a melody could make something feel dangerous without saying a single word. In a 2013 XXL interview, Chop said he initially wanted to be a rapper before the production took over entirely. That pivot from wanting to perform to wanting to build the world the performer would live inside turned out to be everything. Through those school years, he was already moving beats around the South Side, connecting with kids who would later become significant figures in their own right: Lil Durk, Lil Reese, Lil JoJo. The network was forming before anyone had a name for what they were building. The connection to Chief Keef came through a mutual friend named Adai, who brought them together during the sessions for Keef's early mixtape, Bang. The buzz that Bang and Keef's follow-up tape, The Glory Road, started generating in Chicago came in significant part from what Chop was putting underneath those songs: darker, harder, more ominous than what was being made elsewhere. But before that momentum could fully build, Chop got arrested for firing shots from his car, and the sessions paused. When Keef got out of his own juvenile detention stint and started making moves again, he reached out to Chop on Facebook. What happened next is one of those origin moments that sound almost too clean in retrospect, except that the people involved told it the same way every time. Chop, still in high school, would get out of class at 3:50 in the afternoon, grab his desktop computer, not a laptop, an actual desktop machine he carried around to sessions because that was all he had, and head straight to Keef's place, where Keef was on house arrest. They cooked up the track 300 in a single session. Chop told the story himself. He got released from jail, he was on house arrest, and then he called me like, "Bro, I want you to come do my whole mixtape. I just brought my studio to his house every day after school. Literally, school gets out at like 3:50, I'm at his house." 300 was the record that made people pay attention. Not industry attention yet, Chicago attention. The kind that matters in a city where the street response tells you everything. The music video was nothing polished. Keith and his crew rapping where they actually lived, with Chop's production sitting underneath it like something that had crawled up from somewhere underground. What followed was the record that changed everything. In March 2012, Young Chop and Chief Keef released I Don't Like. The song accumulated over 1 million YouTube views almost immediately, and the momentum that followed moved faster than either of them had prepared for. Pitchfork later described the beat as built around thudding drums, tinny chimes, and horror film melodies, a combination that established drill music as something distinct, not just geographically but sonically and emotionally. Billboard called Chop Chicago's go-to producer and singled out his sample-free approach, heavy 808s, sparse melodies, no borrowed sounds, as the defining quality of what he was building. Then Kanye West got involved. Kanye, Pusha T, Big Sean, and Jadakiss all jumped on a remix of I Don't Like, and the song entered a completely different tier of visibility. For most producers, this is the moment you tell your grandchildren about. For Chop, it became one of the earliest signs that he didn't respond well to situations where his work was touched without his permission. In a Pitchfork Rising feature, Chop said he threatened legal action against Kanye because West had altered his drum pattern without consent. He told XXL what he felt when he first heard the remix. I'm hearing the song, and there's different sounds in the beat. It don't even sound like the real beat. It sounded like a rock star beat, and that's not how I do it. That's not my sound. He had specifically asked to hear the remix before it dropped and had only found out it existed when it came on the radio. He was actually in the studio the day Big Sean recorded his verse, but it was laid over the altered version of his beat. Chop had no idea the changes were coming. Kanye eventually reached out directly to smooth things over, and publicly the situation was declared resolved. In 2013, Chop was even brought in to work on sessions for Yeezus, and he described the experience to DJ Vlad with genuine admiration, calling Kanye really motherfucking talented, and noting that Kanye had taken his advice in the studio, asking for his feedback on decisions and listening to the answers. But the resolution never fully settled in Chop's mind. By 2015, in an interview with DJ Booth, he was still framing Kanye as someone who had taken from him, and Keith specifically. He wanted me and he wanted that sound. He was taken from us, you feel what I'm saying? He put it even more plainly in another interview that year, laying out what he saw as a pattern in how Kanye operated, surrounding himself with people, absorbing what they knew, and then disappearing. Kanye don't make it no better, you feel me? He'd be right along with you, try to soak up everything niggas know, get you to write songs for him, you know, and then don't call you after that. Whatever the full truth of that dynamic, the professional relationship between Chop and Keith continued to produce. The album, Finally Rich, released in December 2012 and executive produced by Young Chop, carried 7 Chop-produced tracks and became the document that introduced drill music to the mainstream. Love Sosa alone was described by The Ringer as a quantum leap for both artists, with Chop's production characterized as a thunderous and funereal suite that evolved the sound of drill. He had also secured a publishing deal with Warner Brothers earlier that year after the buzz from Keith's early tracks. He was 18 years old. The infrastructure he helped to build went well beyond his own discography. The success of Finally Rich created the conditions for artists like Lil Durk, Lil Reese, and Fredo Santana to get signed and move nationally. Billboard, Pitchfork, and The Ringer would each later cite his production as foundational to not just drill's rise, but the broader transformation of trap music in the years that followed. The producers who came up behind him, Metro Boomin, Pierre Bourne, carried sonic fingerprints that traced back to what Chop had assembled in a Southside bedroom on a family computer. That was who Young Chop was in 2013. 18, nationally recognized, signed in the studio with Kanye West, and at the center of the most culturally significant rap movement the Midwest had produced in a generation. The version of him that would exist 7 years later barely resembled any of this. The fracture, the industry tensions that surfaced in the wake of the Kanye remix were manageable. What came next wasn't. Between 2013 and 2016, Chop's professional life maintained some momentum. He released projects, stayed active, kept extending his production network to artists like French Montana, but the ground underneath him was shifting in ways that had nothing to do with music. The relationship with Keef hit a rough patch around 2014 when Keef publicly co-signed a diss track from The Game and Tyga called Chirac to LA, which targeted Lil Durk. Chop felt that Keef's siding with West Coast artists against Chicago rappers was disrespectful, and he said so publicly. When Interscope dropped Keef from the label that same year, Chop defended him loudly, calling him the smartest motherfucker in the world and questioning why a label would drop an artist whose album had already recouped its costs. The tension between them never metastasized into a real falling out. Chop later told XXL that Keef remained his little brother and that there would never be real bad blood between them. But it illustrated something about how Chop processed conflict loudly, publicly, and with a loyalty that could tip into volatility when he felt it wasn't being returned. Between 2014 and 2016, Chop kept releasing material and working with a widening circle of artists. He collaborated with French Montana, extended his presence beyond the Chicago bubble he'd helped create, and dropped solo projects that showed he could translate his production instincts into his own artist narrative. The Fader profiled him in late 2014 and described a producer still operating at a high level, still hungry, still building, loyal to Keef while pushing into new territory. For a stretch, the internal turbulence stayed private. In 2015, his grandmother died. A year later, his mother followed. Those two losses need to be understood together because they weren't just personal tragedies. They removed the two anchors his daily life had been built around. His mother in particular was a constant present force. Chop never got a driver's license, even after the money started coming in and the career demanded constant movement. His mother drove him everywhere, to interviews, studio sessions, road trips, all of it. Vice had captured this for their Noisy Chirac documentary, filming her behind the wheel while Chop talked about his career. She wasn't adjacent to his life, she was inside the infrastructure of it. In a 2016 XXL interview promoting his album King Chop, he said he kept her memory alive by bringing her to the studio during the album's creation, speaking about her in a way that made clear how entirely central she had been. Losing her 1 year after losing his grandmother produced a kind of grief that had nowhere obvious to go. He kept releasing music. He and Keef reconciled in 2016 and started working together again. Keef called him to California and they recorded new material, and for a brief stretch, it seemed like the creative partnership might stabilize the rest of what was unraveling. But the stability didn't hold. By 2020, what had been a slow deterioration became a visible collapse. In February of that year, Chop was charged with aggravated cruelty to animals after authorities alleged he had starved a dog to death. He was placed on probation. Weeks later, whatever internal restraint had been keeping his behavior within recognizable bounds gave out entirely. During an Instagram live session with Gilly Dog Kid, Chop was asked to name the scariest person in rap who was actually soft. His answer was 21 Savage, and he escalated quickly from there, claiming he had once shown up to a studio session where both 21 and Meek Mill were present, armed, and that both of them had left the studio as soon as they realized it. He said it directly, the way someone says something they have been holding in. I was in the studio with him and Meek. Niggas ain't living like that. I had that, you dig, on me. Niggas left the studio. Swear to God. The response from Meek Mill was not what anyone expected from a rap beef. Meek didn't fire back with a diss or a threat. He went on Twitter and expressed concern. It's obvious Chop having some mental issues. Y'all be gassing stuff so much, y'all just gonna ignore it. I've been getting beats from him for years. Hope he get well. French Montana was harsher in how he framed the same concern. He tweeted that Chop needed to be in a mental institution and that if someone who cared about him didn't get him somewhere safe, people would only hear about him again when he was gone. 21 Savage posted an Instagram story that was equal parts confused and dismissive, telling fans to go buy Chop's tape because he needed the streams and to pray for him because he had lost his mind. Chop did not register any of this as concern. He treated it as ammunition. He went live again and told his audience that he and 21 lived in the same area of Atlanta. They shopped at the same Walmart, he said, which meant they could settle things at any time. He released a diss track aimed directly at 21. He He posted a photo of 21 Savage with Amber Rose holding a sign with an insult written on it, and then he took things somewhere that removed any remaining ambiguity about his mental state. He got into the back of an Uber and live streamed himself riding through 21 Savage's old neighborhood in Atlanta, leaning out and asking strangers on the street where 21 lived. What happened during that ride is documented in both the video he broadcast and the arrest report that followed. At some point during the trip, he got into an argument with a random man on the street and pulled out a semi-automatic handgun, creating a scene before getting back in the car. As the Uber drove away, a sedan pulled up alongside them and shots were fired, hitting the vehicle. Chop told the driver to chase the sedan. They couldn't catch up. Chop then asked to be taken home and offered to pay for the damage to the car, along with asking the driver not to report anything to the police. The driver reported it, and on April 5th, 2020, Chop was arrested for reckless conduct. He was also cited for driving without a license and with expired tags. Technically, he was a passenger, but the citations reflected the accumulating mess of his situation. 11 days later, Gwinnett County deputies arrested him again, this time for violating the probation from the animal cruelty case. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution confirmed he was booked on 2 counts of probation violation. He had been out of jail for the first arrest for less than 2 weeks. Around the same time he was cycling through those beefs, Chop also started attacking someone who had no apparent connection to any of it. He and R&B singer Chanel Kingston had previously collaborated. Kingston had a track called Kissing Girls that Chop had worked on. Out of nowhere, Chop began publicly questioning Kingston's sexuality, making comments that had no precedent in any previous conflict between them and left observers genuinely confused about the logic. Chop issued something that functioned as an apology and then almost immediately repeated the original comments. The pattern, saying something damaging, walking it back partially, then doubling down, had become so consistent that it stopped reading as impulsiveness and started reading as a method. The King Von situation ran along the same track. During a separate Instagram live, Chop jumped uninvited into the chat on a live stream connected to King Von's girlfriend, agitating and provoking until Von addressed him directly, visibly frustrated. Chop hadn't been part of whatever was happening on that stream. There was no prior conflict with Von that explained the intrusion. He was simply looking for friction, finding it and escalating it in multiple directions simultaneously at a pace that made it difficult to track where any single beef started or ended. Rolling Stone later noted that when Chop reflected on his 2020 actions, he acknowledged they were stupid. That acknowledgement, offered after the fact, doesn't change what happened, but it matters that he could see it at all, even from a distance. The weight of what remains. The full collapse came in layers, each one arriving before the previous had settled. In April 2022, Chop was arrested for jumping bail on his previous charges. He had failed to appear for a required fingerprinting appointment, which meant the original probation violation and reckless conduct charges now had this new layer sitting on top of them. The arrest landed him in Gwinnett County Jail, where he would remain for over 2 years. That same month, his brother Johnny May Cash, a rapper himself, was killed by his girlfriend. The circumstances were not ambiguous. A video of Johnny brutally beating her had circulated months before the shooting. He had prior domestic violence charges involving other women. His girlfriend's attorney described the shooting as clearly an act of self-defense. The courts agreed. For Chop, who had already lost his mother and grandmother, who is now sitting in a county jail, the news arrived as yet another amputation. The social media presence that had been so chaotic and loud throughout 2020 went almost entirely silent. What happened inside Gwinnett County Jail over those 2+ years circulated in fragments, most of them impossible to fully verify. What can be confirmed comes from a video published by XXL in June 2024, which showed Chop in a physical altercation with a cellmate. According to the article, the fight started after another inmate accused him of talking to himself while using a tablet. When the confrontation escalated, they exchanged punches until correctional officers separated them. The video was grainy and fast, but it showed a man who did not appear to be functioning with any recognizable stability, not surviving a bad situation quietly, as people in county jail generally try to do, but actively creating new crises inside the one he was already in. The 2 years in Gwinnett also represented something that had no musical equivalent: a full stop. From 2012 to 2020, even in the difficult years, there was always output: a beat, a project, a collaboration, a social media presence that at minimum confirmed he was still operating. The incarceration removed all of that. No music, no interviews. The only documentation of his existence during that period came from the jail fight video and whatever secondhand accounts circulated from people claiming to know what was happening behind those walls. For a man whose entire public identity had been built through noise, through production, through controversy, through the inability to stay quiet, the silence was its own kind of statement. The more extreme accounts, the reports about sexual behavior toward other inmates, the claims made by people who said they had called the jail or seen footage of things that couldn't be described plainly, circulated primarily through social media and YouTube commentary, often via people who claim to have inside information. None of these accounts, as of the time this script was written, have been verified through court documents, official reports, or credible news organizations. They exist in that particular zone of internet culture where a man's deterioration becomes content, where the worse the story, the more it spreads, and where the absence of denial is treated as confirmation. What is documented, the jail fight, the years of reckless behavior leading to his incarceration, the mental health concerns raised by people who actually knew him, is disturbing enough on its own that the unverified accounts feel almost redundant. Something clearly went wrong. The exact shape of that wrongness in its full detail remains partially in shadow. In December 2024, Young Chop was released from Gwinnett County Jail after over 2 years of incarceration. The first public confirmation came from producer Chop Squad DJ, who posted a FaceTime screenshot of Chop smiling. It was the first image of him that had circulated in years that didn't involve handcuffs or a courtroom. Rolling Stone conducted an interview after his release in which Chop spoke about wanting to get back into the studio and reconnect with Chief Keef. He said his 2020 behavior was stupid. He said he wanted to focus on music. The question of what his legacy actually amounts to, separated from everything that followed his peak, is not a simple one. Vice's documentation of drill music's history described the July 2012 release of I Don't Like as the nuclear moment that introduced the genre to the world and placed Chop's production at the center of that moment. Pitchfork's list of the 200 best songs of the 2010s included it, citing the production as essential to establishing drill as a subgenre in its own right. The Ringer's documentation of rap's decade placed Love Sosa as a record that evolved the sound of drill and extended its reach far beyond Chicago. Billboard's coverage during his peak years described him as the go-to architect of an entire city's sound. The producers who came up after him, Metro Boomin, Pierre Bourne, and others who would shape the sound of trap in the second half of the 2010s, carry sonic DNA that ran through what Chop had assembled. The eerie melodies, the 808 weight, the sense of space inside the beat that made room for the voice without competing with it. These were tools Chop refined before most of his successors had heard of FL Studio. The Fader noted in 2014 that his style had influenced a generation of producers and that he was still expanding his work, staying loyal to Keef while reaching out to artists on other coasts. He had, in the words of the music journalists who were paying closest attention at the time, built something that the industry would spend years trying to reproduce. All of that happened. Arani, it is not canceled by what came afterward, but it is impossible to discuss without what came afterward sitting right beside it. The grief he carried from losing his mother and grandmother, the rage that surfaced in his public confrontations, which grew less coherent and more dangerous the further he got from the period when music was absorbing most of his energy, the animal cruelty charge, the reckless conduct arrest, the Uber rides, and the live stream gunfire and the fights inside a county jail, the brother who died in circumstances that were violent and preventable. All of it is part of the same story. There are people who knew Chop in the early years who have said in various interviews and online reflections that they believe something was done to him, that someone gave him something, slipped him something, that the person they knew before a certain point and the person who appeared after were different in a way that felt chemical rather than purely psychological. Others have compared his trajectory to Kanye West's, the misunderstood genius whose mental health needs were never taken seriously by an industry that preferred to profit from the volatility than address it. These theories exist because the transformation was so complete, so total, that people who cared about him needed an explanation that matched the scale of what they were watching. Whether there is a single explanation, whether it's grief, mental illness, the accumulated pressure of fame arriving at 18 on the South Side, or some combination of all of it, is a question that doesn't have a clean answer sitting in any court record or interview transcript. What exists is the arc, a kid with a family computer and a cousin who showed him a software program, who built a sound that a city had been waiting for, who stood in the studio with Kanye West at 19 and was taken seriously enough to be consulted, who produced the records that gave Lil Durk and Lil Reese and an entire generation of Chicago rappers the vehicle to reach the world, and who ended up over a decade later fighting cellmates in a county jail and cycling in and out of arrests for violations that started with a dog he was accused of starving and ended with him missing a fingerprinting appointment that landed him behind bars for 2 years. He walked out in December 2024. He was 31 years old. The music he made before any of the rest of this happened is still out there. I Don't Like still sounds exactly like what it was, a record that created something. What he does with whatever comes next is the part of the story that hasn't been written yet, and whether it gets written at all depends on forces that have never been entirely in his control and some that have always been entirely within it. That tension between what a person builds and what they let burn is the part of Young Chop's story that doesn't resolve. It just sits there, open, like the last bar of a track that ends before the sample loops.